The morning sun filtered through the massive windows of the Richardson mansion, casting golden light across the marble floors that Maria Santos had been polishing for the past 3 years. At 28, Maria had worked as a housekeeper for wealthy families since she was 18, but nothing had prepared her for the grandeur of the Richardson estate. The house sprawled across 15 acres in the most exclusive part of town, with rooms that seemed to stretch endlessly and artwork worth more than most people made in a lifetime. Maria moved quietly through the hallways, her soft-soled shoes making barely a whisper on the polished surfaces. She had learned early in her career that the best housekeepers were invisible, present only when needed, and gone before anyone noticed. This approach had served her well, especially in the Richardson household where discretion was valued above all else. Richard Richardson III was one of the wealthiest men in the state, having inherited a technology empire from his father and expanded it into a global corporation worth billions. His wife, Catherine, came from old money and spent her days organizing charity galas and managing their various social obligations. But it was their daughter, 8-year-old Emma, who had captured Maria's heart from the very first day. Emma was unlike the spoiled children Maria had encountered in other wealthy households. She was curious, kind, and often lonely in the vast mansion with parents who were constantly traveling for business or social events. Maria had found herself becoming more than just a housekeeper to the little girl. She was a friend, a confidant, and sometimes the only adult who truly listened to Emma's stories about school, her dreams, and her fears. The relationship had developed naturally over the months. Emma would seek out Maria during her cleaning rounds, chattering about her day while Maria dusted or organized. Maria would help Emma with her homework when the tutors weren't available, and she often found herself staying late to read bedtime stories when Mr. and Mrs. Richardson were at their evening social events. Maria understood her place in the household hierarchy. She was staff, and Emma was the daughter of her employers. But the genuine affection that had grown between them felt pure and innocent. Maria had grown up in a large, loving family where children were cherished and protected. Seeing Emma often alone in the big house stirred her maternal instincts. On this particular Tuesday morning, Maria was preparing for what she thought would be another ordinary day. She had arrived at 6 in the morning, as usual, letting herself in through the service entrance with her key. The house was quiet except for the distant hum of the air conditioning system and the occasional creak of the old wooden beams settling. She began her routine in the kitchen, preparing fresh flowers for the various vases throughout the house, and reviewing the day's schedule that Mrs. Richardson's assistant had left for her. The family had returned late the previous evening from a weekend business trip to Chicago, and Maria knew they would appreciate waking up to a perfectly maintained home. As she arranged white orchids in a crystal vase, Maria heard light footsteps on the stairs. Emma appeared in her pajamas, her blonde hair messy from sleep, carrying her favorite stuffed elephant under one arm. "Good morning, Maria," Emma said with a sleepy smile. "Did you miss me while we were gone?" "Of course I did, little one," Maria replied warmly, setting down the flowers. "How was Chicago? Did you see anything interesting?" Emma's face lit up as she began describing the tall buildings and the lakefront, her words tumbling over each other in excitement. Maria listened attentively while continuing to work, occasionally asking questions that made Emma beam with pride at being taken seriously. "Mama and Papa were in meetings most of the time," Emma continued, climbing onto one of the kitchen stools. "But I got to stay in a really fancy hotel room with room service. The waiter brought me ice cream for breakfast." Maria laughed softly. "Ice cream for breakfast? That sounds like a special treat." "It was. But I missed being home. I missed talking to you," Emma said, swinging her legs from the stool. "The hotel was nice, but it wasn't the same. You weren't there to listen to my stories." The innocent comment warmed Maria's heart, but also reminded her of the delicate nature of her relationship with the child. She cared deeply for Emma, but she was always aware that she was an employee first. The boundaries were important, even if they sometimes felt artificial. "Well, I'm here now," Maria said gently. "Would you like me to make you some breakfast? Something a little more nutritious than ice cream?" Emma nodded enthusiastically, and Maria began preparing fresh fruit and toast while Emma continued chattering about their trip. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of heels clicking across the marble floor. Mrs. Catherine Richardson entered the kitchen, perfectly dressed despite the early hour, her blonde hair styled in an elegant chignon. "Emma, darling, what are you doing down here?" Catherine asked, her tone carrying a hint of disapproval. "You should be getting ready for school." "I was just talking to Maria, Mama," Emma said, her voice becoming smaller. "She was making me breakfast." Catherine's gaze moved to Maria, who immediately straightened and stepped back from the counter. "Mrs. Richardson, good morning." I can see what you were doing," Catherine interrupted coolly. "Emma, go upstairs and get dressed. Your tutor will be here in an hour for your morning lessons." Emma's face fell, but she obediently slipped down from the stool. As she passed Maria, she whispered a quiet, "Thank you," before hurrying out of the kitchen. Maria watched her go, feeling a familiar pang of sadness at how quickly the child's joy had deflated. Catherine remained in the kitchen, studying Maria with calculating eyes. "Maria, I think we need to discuss boundaries." "Of course, Mrs. Richardson," Maria replied, keeping her voice neutral and professional. "Emma has been talking about you quite a bit lately, about your conversations, your help with her homework. I appreciate your enthusiasm for your work, but I want to make sure you understand your role here." Maria felt her chest tighten, but she maintained her composure. "I understand, ma'am. I'm here to maintain the house and assist where needed." "Exactly. You're not here to be Emma's friend or confidant. She has tutors for her education and family for her emotional needs. I don't want there to be any confusion about that." The words stung, but Maria nodded. "I understand completely, Mrs. Richardson. It won't happen again." Catherine studied her for another moment before turning to leave. "See that it doesn't." "And Maria? In the future, if Emma comes downstairs during her morning routine, please send her back upstairs immediately. She has a schedule to maintain." "Yes, ma'am." After Catherine left, Maria stood alone in the kitchen, feeling the weight of the conversation. She understood the class distinctions that governed her work, but it didn't make moments like this any easier. Emma was just a child who seemed to crave attention and genuine conversation. Maria's own upbringing had taught her that children needed love and guidance from all the adults in their lives, but she recognized that wealthy families operated differently. She finished preparing the flowers and moved on to her other duties, cleaning the already pristine rooms with mechanical efficiency. Her mind kept returning to Emma's bright smile and the way it had disappeared when her mother entered the kitchen. The little girl had seemed genuinely happy to see her, and Maria couldn't help but worry about how lonely Emma must feel in the enormous house. As she worked, Maria tried to push aside her concerns and focus on maintaining the professional distance that Mrs. Richardson had clearly expected. She had a good job that paid well and allowed her to send money home to her family. She couldn't afford to jeopardize it by overstepping boundaries, no matter how artificial those boundaries might seem. The morning passed quietly as she moved through her routine. She dusted the library, organized Mr. Richardson's home office, and cleaned the guest bedrooms that were always kept ready for unexpected visitors. The house was so large that she often went hours without seeing another person, moving through the rooms like a ghost maintaining a perfect facade. Around noon, Maria was cleaning the windows in the sunroom when she heard Emma's voice echoing from the backyard. Looking out, she saw the little girl playing alone on the elaborate swing set, talking to herself as she often did when there were no other children around. Emma's tutor had apparently finished the morning lessons, and she was spending her free time in the garden. Maria watched for a moment, remembering her own childhood when the neighborhood was full of children and there was always someone to play with. Emma had everything money could buy: the finest clothes, the best education, toys that most children could only dream of. But she lacked the simple joy of having friends nearby. The sound of a car in the driveway interrupted Maria's thoughts. Through the front windows, she saw Mr. Richardson's black sedan pulling up to the main entrance. He was home earlier than usual, which was unusual for a Tuesday afternoon. Maria quickly finished cleaning the windows and moved to the front hall, knowing that he would expect his briefcase and coat to be taken when he entered. Richard Richardson was an imposing man in his mid-40s, tall and broad-shouldered with graying hair and sharp blue eyes. He commanded attention wherever he went, whether in business meetings or social gatherings. Maria had always found him polite but distant, treating her with the kind of courteous professionalism that wealthy people reserve for competent staff. "Good afternoon, Mr. Richardson," Maria said as he entered, reaching for his briefcase. "Maria," he nodded, allowing her to take his coat. "Is Emma home from her morning lessons?" "Yes, sir. She's in the backyard." He paused in removing his cufflinks, a slight frown crossing his face. "Is she alone?" "Yes, sir. Her tutor finished about an hour ago." Richard's frown deepened, but he said nothing more. He handed Maria his cufflinks and headed toward his office, leaving her to hang his coat in the front closet. She could hear him making phone calls through the closed door, his voice carrying the authoritative tone he used in business. Maria returned to her work, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted in the atmosphere of the house. There was a tension in the air that she couldn't quite identify, a sense that the normal rhythm of the day had been disrupted somehow. As the afternoon progressed, she noticed that both Mr. and Mrs. Richardson seemed to be home more than usual, moving through the house with purposeful strides and speaking in low voices when they passed each other in the hallways. Maria tried to stay out of their way, focusing on her tasks while remaining alert to any requests they might have. Around 4 o'clock, while Maria was organizing the linen closet upstairs, she heard Emma's voice crying from her bedroom. The sound was heartbreaking, not the normal crying of a child who had scraped a knee or been denied a toy, but deep, anguished sobs that seemed to come from somewhere much deeper. Maria hesitated outside Emma's door, torn between her desire to comfort the child and the clear boundaries that Mrs. Richardson had established that morning. The crying continued, and Maria felt her resolve weakening. She knocked gently on the door. "Emma? Sweetie, are you okay?" The crying stopped abruptly, followed by sniffling and the sound of movement. "Maria? Is that you?" "Yes, it's me. Can I come in?" There was a pause before Emma's small voice replied. "Okay." Maria opened the door to find Emma sitting on her bed, her face red and tear-streaked. She was still wearing the dress she had put on for her lessons, but it was wrinkled, and there were grass stains on the skirt from playing outside. "What's wrong, little one?" Maria asked gently, sitting on the edge of the bed. Emma looked up at her with eyes full of confusion and fear. "Maria, did I do something wrong?" "What do you mean? You haven't done anything wrong that I know of. Mama and Papa have been acting strange since they got home. They keep whispering to each other and looking at me funny. And when I tried to tell Papa about what I learned in my geography lesson, he just said, 'Not now, Emma,' and walked away." Maria felt a knot forming in her stomach. "I'm sure it's just business, sweetie. You know how busy your parents are. But it feels different this time," Emma insisted, fresh tears beginning to form in her eyes. "They seemed scared or angry. I can't tell which." Before Maria could respond, the sound of footsteps in the hallway made both of them freeze. Mrs. Richardson appeared in the doorway, her face stern and her eyes cold. "Maria, I thought I made myself clear this morning about boundaries." Maria stood quickly, her heart racing. "Mrs. Richardson," Emma was crying. "I was just what? Just ignoring my direct instructions." Catherine stepped into the room, her presence seeming to fill the space. "Emma, go wash your face. Your father wants to speak with you in his office." Emma's eyes widened with fear, and she looked between Maria and her mother uncertainly. "Am I in trouble, Mama?" "Just go do as I said," Catherine replied, her voice softer but still carrying an edge. Emma slipped off the bed and hurried toward her bathroom, casting one last worried glance at Maria before disappearing through the door. Catherine waited until she heard the bathroom door close before turning her full attention to Maria. "I want you to pack your things and leave," Catherine said quietly, her words hitting Maria like a physical blow. "I what?" "Mrs. Richardson, if this is about Emma crying, I was only trying to. This is about your complete inability to respect the boundaries of this household," Catherine interrupted. "You've been inappropriate with my daughter, and I will not tolerate it any longer." Maria felt the world spinning around her. "Inappropriate? Mrs. Richardson, I would never. You've been acting as if you're part of this family instead of an employee. You've been encouraging Emma to confide in you instead of her parents. And now I find you in her bedroom, alone with her, after I explicitly told you to maintain your distance." She was crying. She's just a little girl who needed comfort. She's my daughter, and how she receives comfort is not your concern." Catherine's voice was rising now, and Maria could hear the anger beneath the controlled surface. "I want you out of this house within the hour. Please, Mrs. Richardson. This is all a misunderstanding. I care about Emma, but I would never do anything inappropriate. I've been nothing but professional." "Professional?" Catherine laughed bitterly. "Professional would be following instructions. Professional would be knowing your place. What you've been doing is inserting yourself into my child's life in ways that are completely unacceptable." Maria felt tears of frustration and fear beginning to form. She needed this job desperately. The money she earned allowed her to help support her elderly parents and her younger sister's education. More than that, she had genuinely cared for Emma and had thought she was helping the lonely child by showing her kindness. "Mrs. Richardson, please. If I've overstepped, I apologize. But I've never done anything wrong. I've never hurt Emma or acted inappropriately in any way. She's a wonderful child, and I only wanted to enough." Catherine held up her hand, her face set in stone. "My mind is made up. You have 1 hour to collect your personal belongings and leave. Any attempt to contact Emma or return to this property will result in a call to the police." The finality in Catherine's voice made it clear that no amount 3 days after Maria Santos walked out of the Richardson mansion for what she thought was the last time, Detective Sarah Chun received a call that would change all of their lives forever. She was sitting at her desk at the downtown police station, reviewing case files and finishing her second cup of coffee, when her phone rang with an urgent tone that immediately caught her attention. "Detective Chun, this is Sergeant Martinez. We've got a situation that's going to require your special attention. High-profile family, serious allegations. Can you come to the captain's office immediately?" Sarah had been with the police force for 12 years and had built a reputation as one of the most thorough and fair investigators in the department. She specialized in cases involving children and had developed a gentle but persistent approach that helped young witnesses feel safe while ensuring that justice was served. Her calm demeanor and genuine care for victims had earned her the respect of both her colleagues and the families she worked with. When she entered Captain Rodriguez's office, she found him pacing behind his desk, clearly agitated. With him was a man she recognized from newspaper photos, Richard Richardson III, one of the city's most prominent businessmen. Richardson looked haggard, his usually perfect appearance disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled as if he had slept in it. "Detective Chun," the captain began, "Mr. Richardson has come to us with very serious allegations involving his daughter and a former employee. I want you to handle this personally." Sarah took a seat across from Richardson, pulling out her notebook and adopting the professional but compassionate tone she used with all parents in distress. "Mr. Richardson, I understand you're here about your daughter. Can you tell me what happened?" Richardson took a deep breath, his hands shaking slightly as he began to speak. "It's about Emma, my 8-year-old daughter. We had a maid, Maria Santos, who worked for us for 3 years. My wife dismissed her on Tuesday, and since then—" He paused, struggling with the words. "Since then, Emma has been acting very strangely. Can you be more specific about her behavior?" Sarah asked gently. "She's been having nightmares, terrible nightmares. She wakes up screaming almost every night. She won't eat properly, and she seems terrified whenever we mention Maria's name. Yesterday, she asked us if Maria was going to come back and do it again." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. In her years of experience, she had learned to recognize the signs that often accompanied abuse cases. "Mr. Richardson, has Emma told you what she means by do it again?" Richardson's face crumpled with anguish. "She won't talk to us about it directly. But yesterday, my wife found her in her room with her dolls, and she was acting out scenarios that were very disturbing. Emma was making one doll touch another inappropriately and saying things like, 'This is our secret,' and 'Don't tell Mama and Papa.'" The detective made careful notes, her expression remaining neutral despite the gravity of what she was hearing. "Has Emma used Maria's name specifically in connection with these behaviors?" "Not directly, but the timing can't be a coincidence. Emma was fine before Maria came into our lives, and she seemed to get more and more attached to her over the months. My wife warned me that the relationship was becoming inappropriate, but I thought she was being overly protective. Now I realize we should have acted sooner. Captain Rodriguez leaned forward. Detective Chun, Mr. Richardson has provided us with Maria Santos's address and employment information. Given the seriousness of these allegations and the potential risk to other children, I want you to bring her in for questioning immediately. Sarah nodded, understanding the urgency, but also knowing how important it would be to handle this case carefully. False allegations could destroy an innocent person's life. But if the allegations were true, there could be other victims who needed protection. Mr. Richardson, I'm going to need to arrange for Emma to be interviewed by our specially trained child psychologist. Dr. Amanda Foster works with children in these situations and knows how to help them feel comfortable talking about difficult experiences. Whatever you need, Richardson said immediately. Emma's well-being is our only concern. We just want to know the truth and make sure she gets the help she needs. I understand. For now, I'd recommend keeping Emma's routine as normal as possible while we investigate. Don't pressure her to talk about what happened, but if she volunteers information, write down exactly what she says. Can you do that? Richardson nodded earnestly. Of course. Detective, you have to understand, Maria seemed so trustworthy. She came with excellent references, and she appeared to genuinely care for Emma. But, looking back, there were signs we should have noticed. What kind of signs? Sarah asked. She was always finding excuses to spend time alone with Emma. She would stay late to read bedtime stories, help with homework when the tutors weren't there. My wife expressed concerns about boundaries, but Maria always had reasonable explanations. She said she wanted to help Emma feel less lonely in the big house. Sarah made note of this, knowing that predators often used emotional manipulation and positioned themselves as uniquely caring and understanding. But she also knew that sometimes genuine care could be misinterpreted, especially in households where staff relationships were viewed with suspicion. Mr. Richardson, I want you to know that we take these allegations very seriously, and we'll conduct a thorough investigation. At the same time, I need to remind you that until we have concrete evidence, these are still allegations. I hope you understand the importance of letting the investigation proceed without jumping to conclusions. Of course, Detective, we just want the truth, whatever that might be. After Richardson left, Sarah spent the next hour reviewing the information he had provided and preparing for what she knew would be one of the most challenging interviews of her career. Maria Santos lived in a modest apartment complex on the other side of town, in a neighborhood where many of the city's domestic workers and service employees made their homes. Sarah drove through the tree-lined streets, thinking about the case and the delicate balance she would need to maintain. If Maria was guilty, she would likely deny everything and might even seem convincing in her denials. If she was innocent, she would be devastated by the accusations and confused about why they were being made. The apartment building where Maria lived was clean but aging, with small balconies overlooking a parking lot filled with older cars. Sarah found apartment 2B and knocked on the door, her badge ready but her approach deliberately non-threatening. Maria answered the door in casual clothes, her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. When she saw Sarah's badge, confusion and fear immediately crossed her face. Maria Santos? Sarah asked. Yes, that's me. Is something wrong? Has something happened? I'm Detective Chun. I'd like to talk to you about your former employment with the Richardson family. May I come in? Maria stepped back, allowing Sarah into the small but tidy apartment. The living room was modestly furnished but spotless, with family photos on the walls and a small shrine with candles and religious icons in one corner. Everything about the space spoke to someone who took pride in her home despite limited means. Please sit down, Maria said, gesturing to the small couch. Can I get you some coffee or water? No, thank you, Sarah replied, settling into her seat and pulling out her notebook. Maria, I need to ask you some questions about your relationship with Emma Richardson. Emma. Maria's face immediately brightened with affection before confusion set in. What about Emma? Is she okay? Has something happened to her? The genuine concern in Maria's voice was either completely authentic or the work of a skilled manipulator. Sarah had learned not to make immediate judgments based on initial reactions. Emma is safe, Sarah said carefully. But Her parents have raised some concerns about your interactions with her during the time you worked for their family. Maria's expression shifted from concern to bewilderment. What kind of concerns? I don't understand. Mrs. Richardson was upset that Emma and I had become friendly, but I never did anything inappropriate. I would never hurt that little girl. Can you tell me about your relationship with Emma? How did it develop over the time you worked there? Maria settled back in her chair, her hands folded in her lap as she considered the question. Emma is a wonderful child, but she seemed very lonely when I first started working there. Her parents travel a lot for business, and she spends most of her time with tutors or alone. She would seek me out during my work just to have someone to talk to. How did you respond to that attention? I tried to be kind to her while still doing my job. I come from a large family where children are very important. When I see a child who seems lonely or sad, I want to help. But I was always careful to be appropriate. Sarah made notes as Maria spoke, watching her body language and listening to the tone of her voice. Can you give me specific examples of your interactions with Emma? We would talk while I cleaned. She would tell me about her school lessons or ask questions about my family. Sometimes I would help her with homework if her tutors weren't available and her parents were busy. On weekends, when her parents were away, I would sometimes read her bedtime stories. Did you ever spend time alone with Emma? Only in the normal course of my work. If she was in a room I was cleaning, we might be alone together, but never for inappropriate reasons. And the bedtime stories only happened when Mr. and Mrs. Richardson were at evening events and asked me to stay late to help with Emma's routine. Sarah leaned forward slightly. Maria, I need to ask you directly. Did you ever touch Emma inappropriately or engage in any sexual behavior with her? The question hit Maria like a physical blow. She gasped, her hand flying to her chest as the color drained from her face. What? No, absolutely not. How can you even ask such a thing? The shock seemed genuine, but Sarah had seen skilled liars before. The Richardson family has reported that Emma has been exhibiting concerning behaviors since you left their employment. She's been having nightmares and acting out scenarios with her dolls that suggest she may have been sexually abused. Maria stood up abruptly, beginning to pace the small living room. This is insane. I would never, ever hurt a child in that way. Emma is like a little sister to me. I care about her happiness and well-being. I can't believe anyone would think I could do such a thing. Can you think of any reason why Emma might be exhibiting these behaviors? Or why the Richardson family might believe you were involved? Maria stopped pacing and turned to face Sarah, tears beginning to form in her eyes. I think Mrs. Richardson resented my relationship with Emma from the beginning. She told me several times to maintain my distance, that I was overstepping boundaries. But I never did anything wrong. I just showed Emma the kind of attention and care that any child deserves. Tell me about your last day working for the family. Mrs. Richardson fired me on Tuesday. She said I was being inappropriate with Emma, but she didn't accuse me of anything like this. She just said I was too familiar, that I was acting like family instead of staff. I was heartbroken to leave Emma, but I understood that I had lost my job. Sarah continued questioning Maria for another hour, asking about specific incidents, other family members, and Maria's background with other employers. Throughout the interview, Maria maintained her innocence while expressing genuine concern for Emma's well-being. Detective, Maria said as the interview was concluding, please understand that I would never hurt Emma or any child. If she's exhibiting concerning behaviors, something terrible may have happened to her, but it wasn't me. Maybe you should be looking at other people who had access to her. Such as who? I don't want to make accusations without proof, but there were often visitors to the house. Business associates of Mr. Richardson's, friends of the family. And Emma spent time with various tutors and instructors. I was only one of many adults in her life. After leaving Maria's apartment, Sarah drove back to the police station with more questions than answers. Maria's responses had seemed genuine, but she knew that wasn't enough to clear her of suspicion. She would need to conduct a thorough investigation that examined all aspects of Emma's life and all the adults who had contact with her. Dr. Amanda Foster had conducted hundreds of interviews with child victims over her 15-year career as a forensic psychologist, but she approached each case with the same careful preparation and sensitivity. When Detective Chun called to schedule an interview with Emma Richardson, Dr. Foster immediately cleared her calendar, understanding that high-profile cases required extra attention to proper procedures. The interview was scheduled to take place at the Children's Advocacy Center, a specially designed facility that provided a comfortable, non-threatening environment for young witnesses. The building looked more like a family home than a government facility, with soft lighting, comfortable furniture, and toys that helped children feel at ease during what could be a traumatic experience. Emma arrived with her mother on Friday morning, exactly 1 week after Maria Santos had been dismissed from their household. Catherine Richardson was impeccably dressed as always, but stress lines around her eyes revealed the toll the week had taken on the family. Emma walked close to her mother's side, her usual bright demeanor replaced by a cautious uncertainty that immediately concerned Dr. Foster. "Mrs. Richardson, I'm Dr. Foster," Amanda said warmly as they entered the building. "And you must be Emma." Emma nodded shyly, looking up at her mother for reassurance. She was wearing a blue dress with white trim that probably cost more than many families spent on clothing in a month, but she looked small and vulnerable despite her expensive outfit. "Emma, we're going to talk for a little while in a very comfortable room," Dr. Foster explained gently. "Your mom is going to wait right outside where you can see her if you need to, but it will just be you and me talking. Is that okay?" Emma nodded again, though her grip on her mother's hand tightened slightly. The interview room was designed to put children at ease, with soft couches, a low table with art supplies, and shelves lined with stuffed animals and toys. Dr. Foster had learned that children often communicated more freely when their hands were busy with activities, so she always encouraged them to draw or play while they talked. "Emma, can you tell me how old you are?" Dr. Foster began with simple questions designed to help the child relax. "I'm 8," Emma replied softly, settling onto one of the couches with a stuffed bear in her lap. "8 is a great age. What's your favorite thing to do when you're not in school?" "I like to read. And I like to play in our garden. We have a really big garden with swings and a treehouse." Dr. Foster smiled encouragingly. "That sounds wonderful. Do you play there by yourself or with friends?" "Mostly by myself. Sometimes Maria would watch me play from the windows when she was cleaning inside." The mention of Maria's name was natural and unprompted, which Dr. Foster noted carefully. She continued with general questions about Emma's daily routine, her family, and her activities, allowing the conversation to flow naturally while observing Emma's demeanor and responses. "Emma, can you tell me about the people who take care of you at home?" "Well, there's Mama and Papa, of course. And I have tutors who come to teach me. Mrs. Henderson teaches me piano, and Mr. Williams teaches me French. And we had Maria who cleaned the house, and sometimes talked to me." "What kind of things did you and Maria talk about?" Emma's face brightened slightly for the first time during the interview. "She would ask me about my lessons and tell me stories about her family. She has a little sister who's in college, and she would show me pictures sometimes. Maria was really nice to me." Dr. Foster noticed that Emma's body language became more relaxed when discussing Maria, which was not typically what she observed when children talked about their abusers. Usually, there were signs of anxiety or discomfort when victims mentioned the person who had hurt them. "Emma, I understand that Maria doesn't work at your house anymore. How do you feel about that?" Emma's expression became sad, and she hugged the stuffed bear tighter. "I miss her. I asked Mama why she had to leave, but Mama just said it was time for her to find a new job. I hope she's okay. Have you been having any bad dreams lately?" Emma nodded, and for the first time, Dr. Foster saw signs of real distress cross the child's face. "Yes, really scary dreams that wake me up. Can you tell me about these dreams?" Emma hesitated, looking toward the door where she could see her mother waiting. "They're about scary men who come to our house. In the dreams, they hurt people and break things. And sometimes in the dreams, people I love go away and never come back." Dr. Foster leaned forward gently. "Emma, have any scary men come to your house in real life?" "Not scary like in the dreams," Emma said quietly. "But sometimes Papa has meetings with men who seem angry. They talk very loudly and use words that Mama says I shouldn't hear." This was an interesting development that Dr. Foster hadn't expected based on Detective Chen's briefing. "Can you tell me more about these meetings?" "They happen in Papa's office mostly. But sometimes the men get really upset, and Their voices carry through the house. Maria used to find me when they were being loud and suggest we read books in my room until they left. How did that make you feel when Maria would take you to read? Safe, Emma said immediately. Maria always made me feel safe when things were confusing or scary. Dr. Foster was beginning to form a very different picture than what she had expected. Rather than showing signs of fear or anxiety about Maria, Emma seemed to associate her with safety and comfort. The timing of Emma's behavioral changes corresponded with Maria's departure, but possibly not for the reasons the Richardson family believed. Emma, you mentioned playing with your dolls. Do you like to make up stories with them? Yes, I do that a lot. I have a whole family of dolls, and I make up adventures for them. What kind of adventures? Emma brightened again, clearly more comfortable with this topic. Sometimes they go on trips to faraway places. Sometimes they have tea parties. And sometimes they have to protect each other from bad things. What kind of bad things? Emma thought for a moment, her expression becoming serious. In real life, there are people who hurt other people or try to take things that don't belong to them. Emma, has anyone ever touched your body in a way that made you feel uncomfortable or scared? Emma looked puzzled by the question. What do you mean? Sometimes adults touch children in private places on their bodies, or ask children to touch them in ways that don't feel right. Has anything like that ever happened to you? Emma shook her head firmly. No. Mama taught me about good touches and bad touches when I was little. Nobody has given me bad touches. Has anyone ever asked you to keep secrets about touching or about things that happened between you and them? Again, Emma shook her head. The only secrets I have are good secrets, like when I helped Mama plan surprise parties for Papa's birthday. Dr. Foster continued the interview for another 30 minutes, approaching the topic from different angles while being careful not to lead Emma toward any particular responses. Throughout the conversation, Emma showed no signs of the trauma typically associated with sexual abuse. She didn't display age-inappropriate sexual knowledge, didn't recoil from physical contact, and didn't show fear or anxiety when discussing any of the adults in her life. What did emerge was a picture of a lonely child who had formed a genuine attachment to a caring adult who had shown her kindness and attention. Emma's distress seemed centered on loss and confusion rather than fear or shame. After the interview concluded and Emma was reunited with her mother, Dr. Foster asked to speak privately with Catherine Richardson. Mrs. Richardson, I want to discuss my preliminary observations with you, though I'll need to review my notes and possibly conduct additional sessions before reaching final conclusions. Catherine sat rigidly in her chair, clearly anxious about what she was about to hear. What did Emma tell you? Did Maria hurt her? Emma showed no signs of sexual trauma, and she didn't disclose any inappropriate contact. In fact, she spoke of Maria with affection and seemed to associate her with feelings of safety rather than fear. Catherine's face flushed with confusion and anger. But the nightmares, the disturbing play with her dolls, something happened to cause those behaviors. I agree that something has been causing Emma distress, but it may not be what you initially suspected. Emma mentioned that your husband sometimes has business meetings at home that become quite heated and frightening for her. She also indicated that Maria would help her feel safe during those times. Catherine was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Richard's business has been under a lot of pressure lately. There have been some legal challenges, investigations into his company's practices. He's been having meetings with lawyers and investigators at home because he doesn't trust talking about it at the office. How long have these meetings been going on? For several months, but they've become more frequent and intense in recent weeks. Richard has been under enormous stress, and I know Emma has overheard some very adult conversations about serious legal and financial matters. Dr. Foster leaned forward compassionately. Mrs. Richardson, it's possible that Emma's behavioral changes are related to the stress and uncertainty in your household rather than any abuse. Children are very sensitive to adult emotions and can be deeply affected by tension they don't understand. But her play with the dolls, Richard said she was acting out sexual scenarios. I'd like to observe Emma's play directly before drawing any conclusions about that. Sometimes adults can misinterpret children's play, especially when they're already worried about abuse. Could you arrange for me to visit your home and observe Emma in her natural environment? Catherine nodded slowly. Of course. But what about Maria? Should we be pressing charges? Based on my interview with Emma today, I would strongly recommend against any legal action until we have a much clearer picture of what actually happened. False accusations can be extremely damaging, and, right now, we don't have evidence to support the allegations. After Catherine left with Emma, Dr. Foster immediately called Detective Chun to share her preliminary findings. The conversation was sobering for both women, as it suggested that the case might be heading in a very different direction than originally anticipated. Sarah, I think we need to look much more carefully at what's been happening in the Richardson household beyond Maria's employment there, Dr. Foster said. Emma's distress seems to be related to family stress rather than abuse, and Maria appears to have been a positive influence in her life. Detective Chun sighed deeply. I had a feeling there might be more to this story. I interviewed Maria Santos yesterday, and her responses seemed genuine. But I also know that we can't just take anyone's word for it when a child's safety is concerned. I agree completely, but I think our investigation needs to expand to include other potential sources of Emma's distress. What do you know about Richardson's business situation? Not much yet, but I can look into it. If he's been under legal or financial pressure, that could explain a lot about the household dynamics. I'd also recommend interviewing other staff members who worked in the house. If something inappropriate was happening with Emma, there might be other witnesses or people who noticed concerning behavior. Good point. I'll start with the tutors and any other regular visitors to the house. Dr. Foster spent the rest of the day reviewing her notes from the interview and researching the Richardson family's background. What she discovered painted a picture of a wealthy family under increasing pressure from multiple sources. Richard Richardson's company had been under investigation by federal authorities for possible securities violations. There had been several high-profile lawsuits filed by investors who claimed they had been defrauded. The family's social standing had taken hits as well, with several charity boards asking Richardson to step down from leadership positions. The stress of these external pressures, combined with the demands of maintaining their wealthy lifestyle and social obligations, could easily have created an environment of tension and uncertainty that would be deeply disturbing to a sensitive child like Emma. Maria Santos, rather than being a threat to Emma's well-being, Detective Sarah Chun spent the weekend reviewing every aspect of the Richardson case, and by Monday morning, she had developed a comprehensive plan to investigate all the adults who had regular access to Emma. What she discovered over the next week would fundamentally change her understanding of the situation and lead to one of the most shocking revelations of her career. Her first interview was with Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, Emma's piano teacher, who had been coming to the Richardson house twice a week for the past 2 years. Mrs. Patterson was a refined woman in her 60s who had taught music to children from wealthy families for over 3 decades. Detective Chun, I'm happy to help in any way I can, Mrs. Patterson said as they sat in her elegant living room filled with antique furniture and photographs of her former students. Emma Richardson is a delightful child, and I was horrified to hear that someone might have hurt her. Can you tell me about your interactions with Emma during your lessons? Emma is a bright, talented girl, though I've noticed she seems quite lonely. During our lessons, she often tries to extend our conversations beyond music. She asks about my family, tells me about her day, things like that. It's clear she craves adult attention and conversation. Have you noticed any changes in her behavior recently? Mrs. Patterson considered this carefully. Actually, yes. Over the past few months, Emma has seemed increasingly anxious during our lessons. She's easily startled by loud noises, and several times she's asked me if we could move to a different room because of loud talking coming from her father's office. Did you ever observe these meetings or hear what was being discussed? Not intentionally, but the voices did carry throughout the house. There were often several men with very serious, sometimes angry-sounding voices. Once, I heard someone shouting about federal investigators and potential indictments. It was quite alarming. Detective Chun made careful notes. This corroborated what Dr. Foster had learned from Emma about the stressful business meetings. Mrs. Patterson, did you ever have concerns about any of the other adults in Emma's life? Well, I always thought Maria Santos was wonderful with Emma. That child would light up whenever Maria was around. Maria had such a gentle, caring way with her. I was surprised when Mrs. Richardson told me they had let her go. Did Mrs. Richardson give you a reason for Maria's dismissal? She said there had been boundary issues, but she didn't elaborate. I assumed it was about Maria being too familiar with Emma. Wealthy families often struggle with maintaining appropriate distance from their staff while still ensuring their children receive proper care. Detective Chin's next interview was with Pierre Dubois, Emma's French tutor, who had been working with the family for 6 months. Pierre was a graduate student at the local university who supplemented his income by teaching language lessons to affluent children. Detective, I must say I am very confused by these allegations against Maria, Pierre said in his accented English. In my experience, she was always professional and caring with Emma. Can you describe your typical sessions with Emma? I come to the house 3 times per week for 1-hour lessons. Emma is a good student, but she is often distracted by things happening in the house. There are frequently business meetings in Mr. Richardson's office that can be quite intense. Have you ever felt concerned for Emma's safety while you were there? Pierre hesitated before answering. Not her physical safety, no. But I have worried about the emotional impact of the stress in that household. Emma often seems tense and anxious. Sometimes she asks me questions about difficult topics, questions that suggest she has overheard adult conversations about serious matters, such as, she has asked me about words like fraud and prison. When I asked where she heard these words, she said they came from Papa's meetings. It concerned me that a child her age was being exposed to such concepts. Did you ever discuss these concerns with her parents? I mentioned to Mrs. Richardson that Emma seemed anxious and might benefit from spending less time at home during the business meetings. Mrs. Richardson became quite defensive and told me to focus on teaching French rather than family psychology. Detective Chun was beginning to see a pattern emerge. Everyone she interviewed confirmed that Emma had been exposed to significant stress from her father's business troubles, and that Maria had been a positive, stabilizing presence in the child's life. Her most revealing interview came on Wednesday, when she spoke with Dr. James Mitchell, the family's pediatrician. Dr. Mitchell had been treating Emma since she was a baby and had seen her for a routine checkup just 2 weeks before Maria was dismissed. Detective Chun, I want to be very careful about patient confidentiality, but I can share some general observations, Dr. Mitchell said from behind his office desk. Emma Richardson has always been a healthy, well-adjusted child from a medical perspective. Have you ever had concerns about potential abuse? Never. Emma shows no physical or psychological signs of sexual abuse. In fact, during her recent visit, she seemed more emotionally stable than she had in several previous appointments. What do you mean by that? Dr. Mitchell consulted his notes carefully. Over the past year, Emma has shown increasing signs of anxiety and stress during her medical visits. She's had difficulty sleeping, some loss of appetite, and what appeared to be symptoms of chronic worry. But 2 weeks ago, she seemed much calmer and more like her old self. Did anything in particular seem to account for this improvement? When I asked Emma about how things were going at home, she talked extensively about a woman named Maria who worked for their family. Emma spoke of her with genuine affection and credited her with helping her feel less afraid when her parents were busy or when there were scary meetings at their house. Detective Chun felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. Dr. Mitchell, in your medical opinion, what might cause a child who had been improving emotionally to suddenly develop nightmares and behavioral problems? Any number of stressors could trigger such a response. Loss of a trusted caregiver, increased family tension, exposure to adult conflicts or fears. Children Emma's age are very sensitive to changes in their environment and the emotional states of the adults around them. That afternoon, Detective Chin received a call that would prove to be the breakthrough in the case. Margaret Walsh, who worked as a housekeeper for the family who lived next to the Richardsons, had heard about the investigation through neighborhood gossip and wanted to share some information. Detective, I've been debating whether to call you, Margaret said when they met at a coffee shop near the Richardson neighborhood. But I can't stand the thought of that nice Maria girl being blamed for something she didn't do. What can you tell me, Mrs. Walsh? I've worked for the Hendersons next door for 5 years, and our properties share a fence line. I've seen and heard things from the Richardson house that have concerned me. What kind of things? Margaret lowered her voice, even though they were in a public place. There have been some very disturbing meetings at that house, Detective. Men coming and going at all hours, shouting matches that go on for hours. And I've seen little Emma hiding in her treehouse when these meetings get particularly loud. When did you first notice these meetings? They started about a year ago, but they've gotten much more frequent and intense recently. Just last month, I saw FBI agents at the house with boxes of documents. The whole neighborhood was talking about it. Detective Chin's attention sharpened. FBI agents. Yes, unmarked cars, but definitely federal agents. They were there for hours, and afterward, Mr. Richardson looked like he'd aged 10 years. The little girl was crying in the backyard, and I saw Maria comfort her and take her inside. Did you ever have any concerns about Maria's interactions with Emma? Margaret looked shocked. Concerns? Detective, that woman was the best thing that ever happened to that child. I've watched Maria with Emma countless times when they were in the backyard. She was always patient, kind, appropriate. Emma clearly adored her. Can you think of anyone else who might have had unsupervised access to Emma? Margaret hesitated, then leaned closer. Detective, I need to tell you something that might be important. About 3 months ago, I was working late in the Henderson garden when I saw something at the Richardson house that troubled me. What did you see? There was a man leaving through their side gate very late at night. He was someone I'd seen at the business meetings, but this was different. He was alone, and he looked furtive, like he was trying not to be seen. Can you describe this man? Tall, maybe in his 50s, silver hair. He drives a dark blue Mercedes. I've seen him at the house many times for meetings, but this particular night felt different. And the next day, I noticed Emma seemed especially upset. She was crying in the backyard, and when Maria tried to comfort her, Emma clung to her like she was afraid. Detective Chun felt her pulse quicken. Mrs. Walsh, would you be able to identify this man if you saw him again? Absolutely. I have a good memory for faces, and something about that night stuck with me. That evening, Detective Chun called an emergency meeting with Dr. Foster and Captain Rodriguez to share what she had learned. The investigation had taken a dramatic turn, and they needed to reassess their entire approach to the case. The courthouse was packed on the morning of the preliminary hearing that would determine whether charges should be filed in what had become known as the Richardson case. Media representatives filled the back rows, drawn by the story of a billionaire family, accusations of child abuse, and the dramatic turns the investigation had taken over the past month. Maria Santos sat in the front row with her court-appointed attorney, her hands folded tightly in her lap as she tried to remain calm. The past weeks had been the most difficult of her life, as word of the accusations had spread through her community despite police attempts to keep the investigation confidential. She had lost not only her job, but also her reputation, and several other families had canceled interviews for potential employment. Across the aisle, Richard and Catherine Richardson sat with their high-powered legal team, looking far different from the confident, composed people they had been when this ordeal began. Richard's face showed the strain of weeks of investigation into both his business practices and his family life. Catherine appeared tired and confused, as if she was still trying to understand how their lives had spiraled so far out of control. Judge Margaret Thompson called the hearing to order, and the courtroom fell silent. At 62, Judge Thompson had presided over countless cases involving child welfare, and she was known for her careful attention to evidence and her commitment to protecting children while ensuring that justice was served fairly. We're here today to review the findings of the police investigation into allegations of child abuse in the Richardson household. Judge Thompson began. Detective Chun, please present your findings to the court. Detective Sarah Chun approached the witness stand, carrying a thick file that represented weeks of intensive investigation. As she was sworn in, she made eye contact with Maria Santos, offering a small nod of reassurance. Your Honor, the investigation into these allegations has revealed a complex situation that requires careful examination of all the facts. Detective Chun began. I want to start by addressing the original accusations against Ms. Maria Santos. She opened her file and consulted her notes. After conducting extensive interviews with the alleged victim, Emma Richardson, her medical professionals, household staff, and neighbors, I found no evidence to support the allegations that Ms. Santos engaged in inappropriate conduct with Emma Richardson. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Catherine Richardson's face showed confusion and disbelief, while Richard Richardson leaned forward, his attention focused intently on the detective's testimony. Furthermore, Detective Chen continued, multiple witnesses, including Emma herself, described Ms. Santos as a caring, appropriate caregiver who provided emotional support to Emma during a difficult period in the family's life. Detective Chen, Judge Thompson interrupted, are you saying that these allegations were unfounded? Yes, Your Honor. Not only were they unfounded, but our investigation revealed that Ms. Santos was actually serving as a protective figure for Emma Richardson during a time when the child was being exposed to significant trauma from another source. The courtroom erupted in whispers and gasps. Richard Richardson stood up, his face red with anger. Your Honor, this is outrageous. Are you suggesting that we falsely accused this woman? Judge Thompson banged her gavel. Mr. Richardson, please remain seated. Detective Chun, continue with your testimony. Sarah Chun took a breath before delivering what she knew would be devastating news for the Richardson family. Your Honor, our investigation revealed that Emma Richardson was indeed the victim of sexual abuse, but not by Ms. Santos. The perpetrator was a business associate of Mr. Richardson's who had frequent access to the Richardson home. The silence that followed was deafening. Catherine Richardson's face went white, and she gripped the arms of her chair as if she might faint. Richard Richardson sat down heavily, looking as if he had been physically struck. Detective Chun, please identify this individual for the court. The perpetrator is Mr. James Whitfield, age 54, who serves as outside legal counsel for Richardson Enterprises and has been representing Mr. Richardson in his ongoing federal investigation. Richard Richardson shot to his feet again. That's impossible. James has been our attorney for years. He would never, Mr. Richardson, Judge Thompson said sternly. You will remain seated and silent, or I will have you removed from this courtroom. Detective Chun continued. Mr. Whitfield had numerous opportunities to be alone with Emma Richardson during evening meetings at the family home. According to Emma's testimony, Mr. Whitfield told her that their special games were legal business that she couldn't tell her parents about because it might get her father in trouble. Catherine Richardson began sobbing quietly, the full horror of the situation finally becoming clear. Emma had been abused by someone they trusted completely, someone who had manipulated her fear for her father's legal troubles to ensure her silence. The abuse began approximately 3 months ago, Detective Chin explained, which corresponds to when Mr. Whitfield began staying late for private strategy sessions with Mr. Richardson. Emma's behavioral changes, the nightmares, the anxiety, the inappropriate play with dolls, all began during this period. Judge Thompson leaned forward. Detective, how was Ms. Santos connected to this situation? Ms. Santos unknowingly provided protection for Emma by her mere presence in the house. Mr. Whitfield was only able to access Emma when the house was nearly empty, typically during late evening meetings when most staff had gone home. Ms. Santos often stayed late to help with Emma's bedtime routine, which prevented opportunities for abuse. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place with horrifying clarity. Maria's caring attention to Emma had actually been protecting the child from a predator, and her dismissal had removed that protection at the worst possible time. Additionally, Detective Chin continued, after Ms. Santos was dismissed, Mr. Whitfield's access to Emma increased significantly, which explains why her behavioral problems worsened dramatically that week. Dr. Amanda Foster was called to testify next, explaining her interviews with Emma and how the child had gradually felt safe enough to disclose what had really been happening to her. Emma initially couldn't talk about the abuse because Mr. Whitfield had convinced her that speaking about it would cause her father to go to prison, Dr. Foster explained. She was terrified of being responsible for destroying her family. How did you eventually get Emma to disclose the truth? Judge Thompson asked. When I asked Emma about feeling safe, she immediately mentioned Maria. She said Maria was the only person who made her feel truly protected. This led to questions about what she needed protection from, and gradually, Emma began to talk about the scary man who came to their house and hurt her. Dr. Foster, in your professional opinion, what role did Ms. Santos play in Emma's life during this period? Ms. Santos was a crucial protective factor for Emma. The child's attachment to her was entirely appropriate and beneficial. Ms. Santos provided emotional support and physical safety during one of the most traumatic periods of Emma's life. The final witness was Margaret Walsh, the neighbor who had observed James Whitfield leaving the Richardson property late at night. She identified him positively from a photo lineup and testified about Emma's increased distress the day after she had observed his suspicious nighttime visit. When the witness testimony was complete, Judge Thompson called for a recess before delivering her findings. The courtroom slowly emptied as people processed what they had heard, leaving small groups discussing the shocking revelations in hushed tones. During the recess, Richard Richardson approached Maria Santos, who was standing with her attorney near the back of the courtroom. His face showed a mixture of anguish, guilt, and desperate remorse. "Ms. Santos," he said quietly, his voice breaking. I don't know how to begin to apologize for what we put you through." Maria looked at him with a mixture of sadness and compassion. Despite everything that had happened, her primary concern remained Emma's well-being. "Mr. Richardson, how is Emma? Is she getting the help she needs?" "She's in therapy with Dr. Foster, and she's starting to heal," Richard replied, tears in his eyes. "She asks about you every day. She doesn't understand why you went away, and we didn't know how to explain it. She's a strong little girl," Maria said gently. "With proper support and love, children can recover from terrible experiences. But she's going to need all of her family's attention and care." Catherine Richardson had approached during this conversation, her face streaked with tears and exhaustion. "Maria, we destroyed your life based on our own fears and prejudices. We saw what we expected to see instead of looking for the truth. I don't know how we can ever make this right. You can start by making sure Emma gets the best possible care and by ensuring that Mr. Whitfield faces the full consequences of his actions," Maria replied with quiet dignity. When court reconvened, Judge Thompson delivered her ruling with the gravity that the situation demanded. The evidence presented today reveals a tragic case of misplaced accusations that prevented a child from receiving the protection she needed and nearly destroyed the life of an innocent woman. Judge Thompson began. "Ms. Santos, I want to address you directly. You have been subjected to false accusations of the most serious nature. The investigation has not only cleared you of any wrongdoing but has revealed that you were actually serving as a protective figure for the victim during a period of ongoing trauma." Maria nodded, tears of relief finally beginning to flow after weeks of holding them back. "The court finds that there is no basis for any charges against Ms. Santos. Furthermore, the investigation has identified the actual perpetrator, and I am issuing a warrant for the arrest of James Whitfield on charges of child sexual abuse." Judge Thompson turned her attention to the Richardson family. "Mr. and Mrs. Richardson, your daughter was failed by adults who should have protected her. While your concern for her welfare led you to seek help when you noticed behavioral changes, your immediate assumption that Ms. Santos was responsible prevented you from identifying the real threat to your child." The judge's words were harsh, but necessary. This case serves as a reminder that child abuse often comes from those we trust most, not from those we view with suspicion based on class or racial prejudices. As the hearing concluded, Detective Chin felt a mix of satisfaction and sadness. Justice was being served, but the damage done to all parties involved would take time to heal. Emma Richardson would need extensive therapy to recover from her trauma. Maria Santos would need to rebuild her reputation and career. The Richardson family would need to confront not only their daughter's abuse, but their own biases that had led them to blame an innocent woman. In the weeks that followed, James Whitfield was arrested and, eventually, Captain, "I think we've been looking at this case backwards," Sarah said as she spread her notes across the conference room table. "Everything I've learned suggests that Maria Santos was not only innocent, but was actually protecting Emma from whatever was really causing her distress." Dr. Foster nodded in agreement. "My sessions with Emma support that conclusion completely. She shows no signs of sexual trauma, and she associates Maria with safety, not fear." Captain Rodriguez frowned as he reviewed the new information. "So what are you telling me? That we have a wealthy family falsely accusing their former maid while ignoring the real threat to their daughter?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you," Detective Chin replied. "And I think the real threat might be connected to Richard Richardson's business associates. We need to start looking at everyone who has had access to that house during Richardson's legal troubles. Do we have enough evidence to pursue that line of investigation? We have witness testimony placing suspicious individuals at the house during times when Emma showed increased distress. We have medical evidence that Emma's emotional state had actually improved when Maria was caring for her. And we have a neighbor who observed behavior that suggests someone else might have had inappropriate contact with Emma. Dr. Foster added, I'd like to conduct another session with Emma, but this time I want to ask her specifically about the men who come to her house for business meetings. If someone has been abusing her, she might feel safer talking about it now that some time has passed. Captain Rodriguez made the decision that would change everything. Do it. And, Detective Chun, I want you to start investigating Richardson's business associates. Give me names, backgrounds, criminal histories. If someone else has been hurting that child, we need to find out who. As they prepared to leave the meeting, Detective Chun felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. Relief that they were finally pursuing the right leads, but apprehension about what they might discover. If her suspicions were correct, a powerful businessman's associates might include individuals who thought they were above the law. More importantly, if Emma had been abused by someone in her father's business circle, it meant that the people who should have been protecting her had instead put her in danger while blaming an innocent woman who had tried to help her. The investigation was about to enter its most critical phase, and Detective Chin knew that the truth they uncovered would shock everyone involved, especially Richard and Catherine Richardson, who were about to learn that their accusations against Maria Santos were not just wrong, but had prevented them from protecting their daughter from a real predator who had been hiding in plain sight. As Sarah Chun drove home that night, she thought about Maria Santos, who had spent a week believing that her life was being destroyed by false accusations of the most heinous kind. Tomorrow, they would begin the process of clearing her name while pursuing the real perpetrator. But the damage to Maria's reputation and emotional well-being had already been done, and Sarah wondered if justice would ever truly be served for all the victims in this complicated case. Might have been one of the few stable, caring presences in the child's life during a time of increasing family stress. Her dismissal would have removed an important source of emotional support just when Emma needed it most. As Dr. Foster prepared to write her preliminary report, she reflected on how easy it would have been for the investigation to proceed based on the initial assumptions. A wealthy family's accusations against a working-class woman of color would typically be taken at face value, especially when a child's supposed safety was involved. But proper investigation required looking beyond surface appearances and initial impressions. It required considering all possible explanations for a child's behavior and examining the full context of their environment. Emma Richardson was clearly a child in distress, but the source of that distress might be very different from what her parents initially believed. And Maria Santos, rather than being a predator, might be another victim of circumstances beyond her control. A hardworking woman whose dedication to a child's well-being had been misinterpreted by adults whose judgment was clouded by stress and class prejudices. The investigation was far from over, but Dr. Foster felt confident that the truth would eventually emerge. The question now was whether that truth would come soon enough to prevent an innocent woman from having her life destroyed by false accusations, and whether it would address the real sources of stress that were affecting young Emma's emotional well-being. As she left the Children's Advocacy Center that evening, Dr. Foster made a mental note to follow up on the home visit with Emma and to encourage Detective Chun to expand her investigation to include all aspects of the Richardson family situation. Only by understanding the complete picture could they hope to ensure that justice was served and that Emma received the help she truly needed. Her next step would be arranging the interview with Emma through Dr. Foster. Child testimony was always challenging. Children could be influenced by leading questions or by the expectations of adults around them. But, with proper techniques, they could also provide crucial information that helped identify the truth. Sarah also planned to investigate Maria's background more thoroughly, checking with previous employers and looking for any history of complaints or suspicious behavior. She would interview other staff members at the Richardson house and examine the family schedule to understand who else might have had unsupervised access to Emma. As she sat at her desk organizing her notes, Sarah reflected on the complexity of the case. The Richardson family's wealth and social status would bring intense scrutiny to whatever conclusions the investigation reached. If Maria was guilty, justice needed to be served regardless of the family's prominence. If she was innocent, the false accusation could destroy her life while the real perpetrator remained free. The most important consideration was Emma's well-being. Whether she had been abused by Maria or by someone else, or whether her behaviors had been misinterpreted by worried parents, she needed appropriate care and support. The investigation would need to be conducted with sensitivity to her emotional state while still seeking the truth. Sarah picked up her phone to call Dr. Foster and arrange the interview with Emma. As she dialed, she couldn't shake the feeling that this case was more complicated than it initially appeared. Something about the timeline and the family dynamics didn't feel quite right, but she couldn't yet put her finger on what was bothering her. What she did know was that she would leave no stone unturned in her investigation. Too much was at stake: a child's well-being, a woman's reputation and livelihood, and the credibility of the justice system itself, to approach this case with anything less than complete thoroughness and objectivity. The phone rang as Sarah prepared to dive deeper into what would become one of the most challenging and controversial cases of her career. Little did she know that the investigation she was about to conduct would reveal secrets that would shock everyone involved and challenge everything the Richardson family thought they knew about their own lives. Tea of pleading would change her mind. Maria stood in Emma's bedroom, looking around at the space where she had read so many bedtime stories and listened to so many childhood confidences, and felt her world crumbling. "I understand," Maria said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. As she turned to leave the room, she could hear Emma's voice from the bathroom, singing softly to herself as she washed her face, completely unaware that this would be the last time she would see the woman who had become such an important part of her daily life. Maria walked slowly down the hallway toward the service stairs that led to the small room where she kept her personal belongings. Her mind was reeling with the suddenness of the dismissal and the harshness of Catherine's accusations. She had always been careful to maintain appropriate boundaries while still showing Emma the kindness and attention that any child deserved. As she began gathering her few personal items, a change of clothes, her lunch bag, a small photo of her family, Maria tried to make sense of what had just happened. The accusation of being inappropriate felt like a dagger to her heart. She had dedicated her life to caring for others, first her younger siblings, and now the family she worked for. The suggestion that her care and affection for Emma had been somehow wrong or harmful was devastating. She could hear voices from downstairs, and she recognized Mr. Richardson's deep tone mixed with his wife's higher pitch. They were discussing something intensely, but she couldn't make out the words. The last thing she wanted was to encounter them again on her way out, so she decided to wait in her room until she heard them move to another part of the house. As she sat on her narrow bed, looking around at the simple space that had been her refuge during her time with the Richardson family, Maria thought about Emma and how confused and frightened the little girl had seemed. Whatever was happening in the Richardson household went beyond her own dismissal. Something had clearly upset the family's normal routine, and Emma was bearing the brunt of the emotional tension. The sound of a door slamming somewhere in the house made Maria jump. She heard rapid footsteps on the stairs, and then Emma's voice, high and distressed, calling for her mother. The voices downstairs became more agitated, and Maria felt a sick feeling in the pit of her stomach that whatever was happening was far more serious than a simple disagreement about household boundaries. She finished packing her belongings in a small bag and prepared to face the most difficult part of leaving, knowing that she would never see Emma again and that the little girl would never understand why Maria had suddenly disappeared from her life. As she prepared to descend the stairs for the last time, Maria whispered a quiet prayer that whatever storm was brewing in the Richardson household, Emma would emerge from it unharmed. The house that had been her workplace for 3 years now felt foreign and hostile. The beautiful rooms that she had maintained with such care seemed to mock her as she prepared to walk away from everything she had built there. But most painful of all was the knowledge that somewhere in this mansion, a lonely little girl was about to lose one of the few adults in her life who had truly listened to her and cared about her happiness.